First of all, I have a very strong bias to the natural environment. It's always been the most meaningful part of my life. From the time I was a child and going for walks and hikes in the country. All of these things are major things to my own life. They're of spiritual significance to me. And when I think back on why I got so deeply involved and why I'm still spending so much time, the 90% of it voluntary, I think the other aspect of my nature is I believe in change. I believe it's possible to effect change, and I'm interested in the political process.
We have house tours, and we make $18,000, which is all spent on houses in town. We also have perfectly beautiful gardens. And every year we bullied 5 or 6 of our friends to open their gardens. I think possibly the loveliest one is the lawyer, Mike Harrison's garden. And it's been in different garden books. He has acres of flowers, flower beds, edges, and it's his great hobby. And his wife said it's frightful in the spring, because all winter long he buys seeds, and all early spring, all over her kitchen and basement, he has little boxes with these seeds in. I've never seen anything so beautiful in all my life as his garden. Acres and acres, flower beds, colorful flowers from all over the world, seeds from all over the world.
Well, it was in the mid-70s when it was, when the community became aware that there were contaminated areas in the town, contaminated with low-level radioactive waste and contaminated building materials which had been removed from the Eldorado, which has been since formed into Cameco. Actually, at that time, I wasn't living here. I was a student and traveling, and when I came back and started farming, I was actually in Hope Township, not in Port Hope. But the awareness grew, and one of the things that that surprised me at the time was the denial that was going on within the town that there actually was a problem, and the desire by the powers that be at that time to try and sort of sweep everything under the carpet with it, not to acknowledge what was actually in our midst, and not to publicly address it in an outright fashion. And speaking to a number of my friends who didn't live in Port Hope, they could not understand why a community wouldn't be howling with outrage because Port Hope wasn't doing that.
Actually, when I first became aware of the radioactive waste problem in Port Hope, I was in the Port Hope Hospital and read a copy of the Evening Guide. That was 1975. Up until then, I had thought that Port Hope had a unique facility down there in the harbor, that we had some kind of international significance because of it, and that this was a major attribute to the town.
I personally got involved several years later when Eldorado was proposing putting in a disposal site or dump for their waste, their waste that they had generated over the last 30 years approximately, and their ongoing waste, about 2 kilometers from our home farm, 2 or 3 kilometers. So that's when I really felt that we were being shafted in Hope Township. At that point in Hope Township, we already had one waste site in the township which was leaking, and there was a fair bit of contamination which had spread from the site. And Eldorado had a terrible track record on environmental issues and also dealing with the public in the community that they're located in, both here and in Saskatchewan, based on some trips I'd made to Saskatchewan to visit friends. I was aware that they had the same reputation there. And I felt that the community was just going to be had unless there was some opposition to this proposed siting of a disposal site in Hope Township.
From 75 on, including the present day, I've been learning the downside of the problem. the major downside for this community is the waste. There is still major waste, low-level radioactive waste lying around the town. There are also emissions coming out the stacks and out the pipes that the residents of the town are, for the most part, unaware of, that could be a health hazard. There've been, over the years, there's been large mismanagement of, particularly of the wastes, and also there've been the usual technical failures and human errors in the functioning of this plant. But it's the nature of the facility that makes it so dangerous. I mean, I imagine most industries have these problems, but this is a peculiar problem here because of the long life of the wastes, the hundreds and thousands of years that these wastes remain toxic. And my position is definitively that we in our generation have no right to burden future generations with these problems. So I reckon that there has been in the order of $50 million spent through government action, at least 50 million to date, on trying to do something about the wastes in Port Hope, and there's still no solution to the problem.
The waste in the town of Port Hope was deposited, it came from Eldorado and was deposited in various areas in the town, basically in 3 different mechanisms. The first was it went to designated waste storage sites or dumps, where it was deposited in on a site that was chosen, probably just because of the ease of dumping it there and it was available. The second was that it was viewed as clean fill, and was used in several locations to fill up ravines or to level lots so that houses can be built on them. And the third was building materials, which when they made renovations at the plant, some of the building materials which were contaminated were sold in the sort of scrap material business and ended up being incorporated into some of the buildings. So there frequently is a contaminated plume of groundwater found around these sites, and this is the same in the landfills, in the site in Welcome and also in Port Granby.
Well, the first thing was to found a citizens group, and I guess the first meeting was in this room and included Farley Mowat and others, and so I've been part of these citizens groups since the beginning, and that's 75, 76, and following the informing ourselves of the problem that existed in Port Hope, following very close on the heels of that came a federal environmental assessment hearing, which was set up because Eldorado Nuclear, was known by that name at that time, wished to locate a new plant in the Port Granby area, and they also needed a new waste facility. So I took part in that. I was one of 2 citizens, along with John Veltice, who's a school teacher from the Port Granby area, who really tried to express some opposition to this facility. And we did it by contacting the neighboring farming families, and it turned out to be the women who really voiced their concerns about this facility coming into the midst of a rural area, partly because the hearings were held spring and fall, and the men were out in the land.
My son was a geophysicist. I'm not quite sure what he did. He put his Geiger countery things into a plane, but when he had taken a customer, he wanted to show them how it worked. So they would put up in Toronto, and they'd fly down to Port Hope, and it'd be fine, 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 till it got over Port Hope to Eldorado, and the thing would go boom, 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 boom. Well, the man said, that's fine, I'll buy 4. But we were booming here.
It was then I learned that the levels of emission from their present waste dump, it was in fact 150 picocuries of uranium was flowing out of the Port Granby dump into Lake Ontario at the time that the regulation was for 3 picocuries. It's now being lowered to 1. This is at 1 picocurie per liter. And anyway, these kinds of really extreme levels of toxicity were excused at the hearing by saying that once they get into Lake Ontario, it's sufficiently diluted to meet the standards. But you see, that's was something that I simply would never accept. So all of this resulted finally in the government refusing to allow Eldorado to locate its new refinery, and this was the first time that an outright refusal had ever been given under the FIRO process.
In this, day and age when we've had the extensive use of chemicals and chemical technology being used because it's both so powerful and so effective and inexpensive compared to earlier technologies, one of the things we're having to come to terms with are the wastes from this technology. And most communities have problems from these wastes, and so they really, when if you're in a community that has a problem such as this, you think, many people might think, well, let's move somewhere where this problem doesn't exist, but in reality, you can't get away from it. There are toxins that have been found at both the North and the South Pole. It's just the fact of the sort of the whole situation that the globe finds itself in, and so what I think you have to do is look at resolving and solving and somehow dealing with the issues rather than just trying to run away from it. And that's why I'm involved in this, and why also I've gotten involved with the Port Hope Green team in terms of making a incremental difference in the situation that the environment is in globally, but from a base in Port Hope.
When the decision came that Eldorado could not build its refinery in Port Granby, everybody in Port Hope had been thinking, oh, wonderful, more jobs in construction, more jobs in managing the refinery. And so there was a meeting held in the town hall, all the important political and commercial interests in the town, and they said, well, why on earth did the decision go against building it? So somebody said it was those 2 people, John Veldhuis and Pat Lawson. And so this resulted in me, I wasn't at the meeting, I for some reason didn't go. Remember, I was bringing up 4 children and managing the house, and it was hard to do everything. In fact, I had to get a phone put right next to the stove so that I could answer all the queries, mostly from the media, while all this was hot and heavy. But somebody phoned my husband and said, I think it'd be wise if Pat didn't appear downtown. And then following that, there were great signs made in Port Hope. I think the Chamber of Commerce got them made. We support Eldorado. And that was a result of them being refused by the federal government to build the refinery in Port Granby. Then they want to build it in Hope Township. And so everybody put these signs up in their shops and their businesses. They were taken all around town. So you can see the kind of conflict it put me in my own community. And why am I here in the first place? I'm here because I like the rural, small town, relating to the people in the shops on a friendly basis, knowing them. We'd gone to high school together. they were my friends, and the whole thing's being turned upside down by this disagreement over nuclear power. And it seemed that there weren't a lot of other people in the community that felt the way I did, as strongly as I did anyway, to speak up like that. So I began to even question my own self over this whole thing. And since the jury's still out on this subject, nobody yet knows the level of health hazard of low-level radioactive waste, and that's what we've been exposed to in this town. Nobody can say for sure yet. There's a huge debate on the subject. It isn't a cut-and-dried thing, so it was a very hard personal thing for me to stick to my guns.
I think, frankly, it's our main street is just the way it looks now, pretty well, the way it looked in the 1850s. We've done our best to keep it that way, you see, and we've stopped Woolworths from building a big red building and tearing down two good buildings. We've had a frightful row with Scott's Chicken Villa, who wanted to build its Scott's Chicken Villa's red building right at the very foot of our main street. Now, can you imagine coming down a mid-18th century street and facing Scott's Chicken Villa, and Dr. Sanders, is it, face, goateed face, revolving round? We wrote a letter to the paper about this, and it went right to California. And I said, how would you like to see me getting undressed at night and going to bed and seeing Colonel Sanders' revolving face peeking into your window? And they started teasing. They were going to sue the town because they were frightened, you see. And some of the people out west said, well, here you've gone into the business of peeping Tom business, eh? And they didn't like that, so they sold the land again, and they've built where they should be under the tracks.
The problem with this subject is that it's so technical, so scientific, and really requires an area of expertise that was completely beyond me. And that's one reason that a lot of people won't get into it, such as the Port Hope doctors. They just don't have the time to really understand it. So I had to try and learn what I could in my spare time, so to speak, about it, to be effective opposition to it. But the problem, as I look back on it now from this perspective, though I didn't realize it at the time, is that I'd much rather be doing something positive for the environment. And that's the way I feel right now about it, that I don't always want to have to be in opposition. I mean, I really hate being in opposition to people. I'd much rather work with people to solve a problem. And I was being placed in this kind of position by this particular nuclear problem in the community. So I've always tried to work in other positive areas, and I am presently on the Port Hope's been named a green community, and I've been one of the people involved in getting that established. And that's much more worthwhile to me, but the dilemma lies in the fact that all this money that has had to be put out to clean up this mess is still not cleaned up. I mean, for instance, just in the last instance, phase 4 of the siting process, which is the whole process to try to deal with these wastes responsibly, is costing $23 million, and that money has been taken from the green plan of the federal government. And so you can see the kind of dilemma here that we're into. And that's exactly why I feel that the stuff should never have come out of the ground in the first place. Any person of common sense would say that this method of producing energy has cost way too much.
We as citizens have to recognize that this is a new responsibility, and that You know, when you move from being, you know, thumping a tub on the street or carrying a placard to inside participating in the decision, you end up having to face very difficult issues and make compromises, and what you strive to achieve, or I've striven to achieve, incremental improvement.
I just love the river, and it flows through the middle of this town, and there are hills on either side, and there are ravines throughout the town, and there's the lakefront. It's a special place. The topography is wonderful, and this is really what I care about, and this is what I would urge the younger generation to protect and warn them that it's in danger of being lost, not only by that nuclear facility that has totally ruined our harbor, but by unconscionable housing developments and loss of the trees in the ravines, and through many different ways. And this is really the thing we have to fight for. Then on top of all of that, we're going to find in a few years that this plant will be closed, and we have to deal with decommissioning. And what do we do there? Nobody yet knows what on earth to do, because this whole mess in Port Hope started because they pulled down a building in 1954 and scattered the stuff all around town. And that's when we first came to know about it. Now, whatever is going to happen when the whole plant closes, nobody knows where to put all those, that brick and mortar and all that stuff that's contaminated.
Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always the present. Footfalls echo in the memory down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened into the rose garden. My words echo thus in your mind. But to what purpose disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Other echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow? Quick, said the bird, find them round the corner, through the first gate, into our first world. Shall we follow the deception of the thrush into our first world? There they were, dignified, invisible, moving without pressure over the dead leaves in the autumn heat, through the vibrant air. And the bird called in response to the unheard music hidden in the shrubbery, and the unseen I-beam crossed, for the roses had the look of flowers that are looked at. There they were as our guests, accepted and accepting, so we moved, and they, in a formal pattern along the empty allée into the box circle, to look down to the drain pool. Dry, the pool, dry concrete, brown-edged. And the pool was filled with water out of sunlight, and the lotus rose quietly, and the surface glittered out of heart of light, and they were behind us, reflected in the pool. Then a cloud passed, and the pool was empty. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden, excitedly containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time passed, and time future, what might have been and what has been, point to one end, which is always present.